Hello and welcome to The Point. I'm Marcel Wieder, coming to you from the Peach Gallery in downtown Toronto. Today on The Point, as the mercury drops, Ontarian consumption of energy rises. The Toronto District School Board gets a political shakeup, and we take you inside Queen's Park to see what's happening in the 41st session. All this and more on The Point. Electricity use peaks twice daily, when people get up in the morning and when they come home from work. This week, Kathleen Wynne and Philip Couillard signed an unprecedented deal to swap electricity during these peak hours. As a result, starting in 2015, Ontario and Quebec will exchange 500 megawatts of electricity. Ontario will provide to Quebec in the winter when demand peaks there, and Quebec will provide Ontario in the summer when we see the greatest demand for electricity. We're joined today with Scott Travers, President of the Society of Energy Professionals, IFPTE 160. Thank you for joining us, Scott, today.
Thanks for having me, Marcel.
Scott, a lot of Ontarians are very concerned about the rising cost of electricity. It's an issue that's been going on for a number of years, and we have some big ticket items that the province and ratepayers and taxpayers are going to be facing, including the refurbishment of our nuclear fleet. Can you tell us what you think are some of the important issues around energy and specifically electricity?
Thanks for asking that, Marcel. And electricity is a vital commodity for all of us, and certainly we understand the rising costs are an issue for everybody, especially lower income and fixed income people. I think one of the things we have to remember, though, in the electricity sector is we're making investments in our future. This is infrastructure money, in particular when we talk about nuclear refurbishments, because one of the things about nuclear is the costs tend to be very high up front. It's very capital intensive to do the upfront work, but then the operating costs tend to be very low. So when the total ticket price for a nuclear refurbishment seems very high, but spread over the number of years that the plant operates and the massive amount of power it puts out, it's actually quite cost reasonable.
What other areas do we need to look at in terms of investing in our electrical system? What about the grid and other areas?
Well, certainly there's investment required throughout the system. The transmission system is getting older. A lot of the wires on the system have aged significantly, and there's significant amounts of money have to be spent to modernize, both replace aging systems, but also to modernize the system and bring new technologies into place, and to expand the system to bring clean, renewable, reliable power throughout the province. So there will be large investments required in the transmission system as well.
Now, talking about rates, the Ontario Power Generation made an application for an increase in rates recently, and that was denied by the Ontario Energy Board. What impact will that have?
That's a good point. First off, it wasn't denied. What the Ontario Energy Board did was reduce the rate that they were willing to offer to pay for Ontario Power Generation, and it's a significant issue for the province. Certainly, in the short term, that will reduce costs for the ratepayers, but we need to look at the longer term impact of a decision like that. Anyone who owns a car or owns a house can understand that if you don't do your investment up front in the short run, you can save some money, but you really need to be careful that you're not going to end up paying more in the long run for that kind of decision. Ontario Power Generation is already the lowest cost generator in Ontario, and we know that Ontario Power Generation, if they were getting the same cost per megawatt of electricity that the average of other generators were getting, electricity prices would be 30% higher than they are now. So one of the things the public doesn't understand, it's not being talked about, is OPG hasn't had a rate increase since 2008. So while costs have been going up in Ontario for electricity, it hasn't been because of OPG. They've in fact had their rates frozen for 6 years now. And so it's difficult. Our concern is that what the OEB is doing in this rate process is actually going to damage the long-term viability of the Ontario power generation. And since OPG has been doing a tremendous job in mitigating rates within Ontario, the concern is that if their long-term viability gets jeopardized, we'll have to turn to other higher cost forms of generation in the long run.
Now, the province had a commission that's headed by Ed Clark study different options for making investments more efficient. And one of the areas that they looked at was OPG and Hydro One. Could you discuss some of those areas that they've talked about?
Sure. Thanks. Yeah. The Clark Commission is kind of a mixed bag. They did some things very well, and we agree with some of their recommendations, but we have some issues with some of what their interim report said.
Such as?
Well, just on the good side, I want to point out they did an excellent job in talking to stakeholders. We met with them. We know they met with other stakeholders, and they ran a very good process that way. But we do have some issues with a couple of the recommendations they made. We don't support the interim recommendation of splitting off the distribution piece of Hydro One and separating it from the transmission piece. The point of the process was to look for value for Ontario consumers. We're also concerned about the reliability impact in northern communities in particular, where distribution and transmission operate so closely together, and we're concerned that it'll have a negative impact on the long term.
Scott, we have just a minute left in our time, and you touched on policy. One of the policies of the previous, I guess, still Liberal government was to introduce the Green Energy Act and to put more emphasis on renewable energy. How is that working out, and what impact is that having?
Well, I think it's fair to say it's not working out as well as it could have. And when you go back and look at the objective of doing that was to reduce CO2 emissions. And again, we didn't have the full discussion and investigation that we should have had. Ontario is a different jurisdiction than many. In Ontario, the transportation sector is the largest producer of CO2, not the energy sector. Even before we shut down our coal plants, we had a very clean electricity sector in Ontario because of our baseload hydro and our nuclear power. And so it's not clear that we got the best bang for our buck by investing in renewables in the energy sector. We may have done better by making larger investments in our transportation sector and in transit. But because we didn't do the kind of evidence-based planning process that would have done that analysis, we don't really know if we got the best value for our dollar through the Green Energy Act.
Thank you so much, Scott. Scott Travers, President of the Society of Energy Professionals.
Thanks, Marcel.
Up next on The Point, we take you back to school.